Welcome back, everyone. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now in your country. And if you enjoy scary stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps the channel grow. All right, let's begin. The job of Yosemite Park Ranger isn't what most people imagine. A lot of people picture us as law enforcement types, handing out tickets and enforcing park rules, when really that's a very niche aspect of it. Mostly we're just here to assist you. Handing out maps, not speeding tickets, and giving people directions to the best views or to ideal camping locations. We remind people about safety and weather conditions from day to day. But the main thing we do, and this is more vital than people realize, is that we're just here in case anyone gets lost or hurt. We deal with a lot of belligerent people who like to think the park is their personal playground where they can do whatever they want. It's my job to remind them to follow the rules, to dispose of their trash properly, to pick up after their dog, and to clip its leash back on while walking the trails. Some people take this as a personal assault on their freedoms, when really I'm just looking out for the safety of other visitors, like cyclists and horseback riders who share the paths. Dogs can be unpredictable and can misbehave on trails, and we have to look out for everyone. Still, I don't often get a lot of positive feedback for enforcing the rules. Nobody likes to be told what to do, trust me. I get it. Every once in a while, something interesting happens to break up the boredom and monotony of the job. Last summer, I was walking around at night, doing a patrol of the campgrounds, when I saw something rustling around in the bushes. A guy came crawling out dressed in a furry dog costume. I asked him if he was okay, and he just barked happily, then crawled away in the opposite direction. Shortly afterwards, I saw him chasing another person who was dressed as a cat, a woman who went scampering away and hid beneath a camper van, laughing excitedly and making purring sounds, licking the dirt from her fur pants with a long tongue. She saw me watching and clawed the air in front of her face, hissing territorially. It's not how I would choose to spend my Friday nights, but I'm not one to judge. By far the most interesting thing which has ever happened to me at Yosemite occurred last summer. And it wasn't just interesting. It was utterly terrifying. Every night when I fall asleep, I have nightmares about that day. Every time I close my eyes, I picture those dark tunnels in the rock face. It all started when someone called in a report saying they were out on the Cathedral Lake Trail when their brother went missing. The pair had been out hiking when they got separated somehow. At first, we thought it was just a routine mishap. People go missing in Yosemite all the time. It's no big deal in most cases, since usually the missing parties are found quickly enough. Half the time alcohol is involved, and I have to remind people to pace themselves if they indulge while camping. But every once in a while, those missing people don't turn up, and we have to dispatch much larger search parties. In this case, I went out on my own at first, heading to where the man had called us from. I drove out on an ATV since it was a 16-mile round trip. When I got there, the guy looked frantic. He ran over to me and started speaking way too fast to understand. I told him to slow down and just give me the facts. It's important to stay calm in these types of situations. The guy took a deep breath and let it out. Then he started talking again, a bit slower this time. We were walking on the trail. He was right beside me. Then I turned around to look at the lake, and when I looked back, he was gone. Just fucking gone. I tried to get a sense if the man had been drinking or doing drugs. It's not that I'm trying to assume the worst in people, but we have to think of these types of things. The simplest explanation is usually the right one after all. And it was much easier to imagine the two brothers taking sips from a Mickey and one of them getting separated and lost than to imagine one of them being abducted by aliens or taken in a very selective rapture. Slow down for a second. Take some deep breaths. What's your name? Let's start with that. Greg, he said, his face turning a shade less purple as he began to inhale air with trembling breaths in and out. Okay, Greg. I took out my notepad, jotting this down, along with his last name, which I'll leave out for the sake of privacy. And what's your brother's name? Dave, he said, sniffling. I saw he had been crying recently. Where was the last place you saw your brother? Let's retrace your steps. He started protesting, saying that wasn't going to help. But I convinced him we had to at least try. Greg led me back a little ways to where he'd seen his brother last. I walked back here already, and I looked all around here before calling you guys. I thought maybe he went off the trail to take a leak and tripped, hit his head. Something like that, I don't know. I was grasping at straws. But I think something... He hesitated. Something what? I probed. Do you think something took him? Like those stories you hear about? He sounded embarrassed, but I tried to get more out of him and asked him which stories he was talking about. You know, you hear stories about Yosemite and other national parks. I'm sure you've heard about them, even if you're not in on the conspiracy. Stories where people go missing like this and it makes no sense. Someone turns their back for a second and their son or their sister or whoever is just gone. Disappeared like Dave. I saw it on YouTube. Uh-huh, I replied, not sure what corner of the internet this guy had been visiting. Well, that doesn't happen around here, I can assure you. Let's keep looking, I'm sure he'll turn up. But the longer we looked, the less we found. It really did seem like the man's brother had just vanished. I was about to call in for more support, maybe even a K9 unit, when the man yelled from a little ways off the trail, saying he'd found something. Following the sound of his voice, I eventually came to find him at the base of the mountain, face to face with the granite wall. At first I didn't understand what he was doing there, but as I got closer I saw there was actually a cave which was well hidden in the rock face. It blended in perfectly with the mountainside until you were almost nose to nose with the pale gray stone. Good job, I said, patting him on the shoulder. But then I looked at our surroundings, getting nervous. We were pretty far from the path in the thick part of the forest which was overgrown and tangled with vines and shrubbery. Do you think he would have gone into this cave on his own? Greg looked around as if checking to see if his brother had left a message for him. But there was nothing. I don't think so. It's not like him to just leave me on the trail alone either, especially not for this long. If this was a prank or something, he'd have come back by now. I can tell something's not right. Has your brother played pranks on you like this before? I asked. The man was in his 20s and his brother was probably of a similar age. Young men occasionally got lost or injured trying to scare each other by pulling pranks or filming videos in the woods. It was rare, but it had happened before. Once or twice, he admitted. I didn't call you guys for a while because I thought he was messing with me. I wouldn't put it past him, but not for this long. I was getting annoyed. Mosquitoes were biting my neck and I was sweating in the heat of the afternoon, after marching through the foliage for hours. I imagined the guy hiding inside the cave trying to scare his younger brother. Maybe he had fallen asleep in his dark hiding place or he was just pushing it too far, but either way, I was upset. If this was a prank, it had wasted most of my afternoon. It probably annoyed me even more because I had my own older brother who had played tricks on me more than once in our younger days, and this was bringing back memories. All right, you can come out of there right now, I yelled, marching into the cave, thinking the young man would be hiding in the small alcove. I turned a corner and saw a dark tunnel, leading deep into the darkest recesses of the granite. This made no sense. As far as I knew, there was no tunnel in this location, especially not one of this size. But it had been well hidden, nearly invisible in the rock face. I wondered if anyone knew about it, and I wondered if it was safe. I didn't feel comfortable going any further. The dark space looked like it went on for a long, long way into the distance, and I was getting an eerie feeling standing there. It felt like I could almost hear voices whispering from all around me. The words were lost in the echoing cave, and I got a strong sensation that we weren't alone, like icy fingers walking slowly up my spine. The other man came in behind me, marveling at the cave for a second before continuing to press forward. Come on, Greg said, forging ahead. He might be in trouble. He was anxious to keep going. Not scared enough of this horrifying place with whispering voices coming from the shadows, and his apparent lack of fear made me twice as scared. I'm going back for help, I said, shuffling backwards. It isn't safe. Nobody knows we're here. My training and my instincts were overwhelming my curiosity, but Greg seemed not to care about the dangers. The man continued going forward, disappearing into the darkness. A few seconds later he was gone, and there was no indication he had ever existed in the first place. Greg? I called out into the black abyss. There was no response. He might as well have been a ghost. An overwhelming urge to follow him rushed over me, and I took a few steps forward, feeling hypnotized by that black tunnel leading on and on forever. But then I shook my head, slapping my face as I tried to wake myself up from whatever trance I was in, which was overruling my common sense. I turned around and left the cave, my legs shaking and my hands unsteady as I called for assistance. After meeting the search party back at the trail, We went through the woods again to find the cave hiding within the 10,000-foot-tall rock face of Cathedral Peak. But it was gone. I remembered having trouble finding it the first time, and thinking it was well hidden among the pale gray surface of the mountainside. You had to be nearly face to face with the wall to see it, since it was so invisible among the crags and boulders. I tried to tell my supervisor and the other members of the search party, but they didn't believe me. They said there was no tunnel there. They looked for hours and found nothing. Helicopters swept the area and more teams with more dogs, bloodhounds, and German shepherds, but nothing was turned up. There was no trace of anyone else having been out there except me. Dumbfounded for the rest of the week and for the rest of the summer, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept going back to that conversation I'd had with the man on the trail named Greg, the man who'd lost his brother and then disappeared into a cave that didn't exist. More and more, I began to wonder what would have happened if I'd followed him. It took a full year for me to build up the courage to go back out to that exact spot again. It happened to be on the same date and around the same time of day, only this time I wasn't on duty. It was my weekend off, so I had plenty of time to comb the area for clues. My backpack was full of provisions and I had enough to last for a night or two in the woods, maybe longer if necessary. Somehow I knew. I just had a feeling that if I went back on that day at that time, it would be there, the cave that didn't exist. Cathedral Peak loomed above me, getting larger as I made my way through the forest, moving toward it. The gray clouds above were shrouding the sun in darkness, while the thickening canopy blocked any remaining light from overhead. A chill ran through me, causing me to shiver involuntarily as I laid eyes on the black hole in the rock face, so plain and clear to see now. Taking a step forward, I found myself standing right in front of it, and I reached up my hands to feel the outline of the entryway, as if to confirm it was real. It was. I took a deep breath, like a diver about to submerge, and went inside. The air was cold and damp, with a strange coppery smell. My flashlight was on my belt and I grabbed it, but then decided not to turn it on. I was getting a strange feeling like I was in an unsafe place and needed to stay silent and hidden. There was a sound coming from up ahead which I couldn't place. It was a slurping, chewing sound, like someone tearing meat from bones with their teeth. As I went deeper and deeper into the tunnel, the air became colder and so damp that I felt droplets of water running down my face and into my eyes. A trickle of light was filtering in somewhere as well, causing the cavern to faintly glow in places. The air seemed to shimmer and dance in front of my eyes as I went deeper and deeper, feeling entranced as I stumbled along in the shadows. Faintly, I realized that there was something wrong with me, as if I had been drugged, but I no longer cared. In fact, I found the sensation to be quite pleasant, and then I was abruptly awoken from my daydream as I came around a corner and saw the horror unfolding within the guts of Cathedral Peak. Can't possibly explain what I saw down there, and the shadows obscured most of it, drenching the monstrous creature in darkness. But the impression I got was of something like an octopus or a squid, crossbred with an oversized plant or a fungus, sucking and slurping, chewing and crunching something between its teeth. After a few moments of inspection, I realized it was a person's face that was being eaten, as the details could just barely be seen in the dim light of the cave. The skin was being stripped from its cheeks, the eyelids ripped off, and the lips peeled back and slurped up like noodles. Tentacles like tangled vines were everywhere, slithering and sliding across the pale gray stone floor all around me. At first I thought it was mud beneath my feet, but as I came fully to my senses, I realized it was blood mingling and mixing with the dust beneath my feet, creating a dark, toxic red slurry which sucked at my boot heels. The tentacle vine things were everywhere, I realized with numb shock. My feet were actually stepping on some of them, and I was amazed the creature hadn't noticed me yet, but it was obviously too caught up with whatever meal it was currently ingesting. Feeling very glad I hadn't turned on my flashlight, I began to back away very slowly, my boots crunching across the writhing tentacles. A sick knot in my stomach was rising up and threatening to make me puke, fear and revulsion twisting my gut. My mind was spinning and my thoughts were racing, understanding there was a very good chance I would never leave this place. I tried desperately not to step on any more of the squirming, writhing tentacles which moved and twisted on the floor of the cave, soaking and basking in the blood which had been spilled everywhere, like pigs rolling happily in the mud. There was no possible way there could be so much of it, I thought. No one person has this much blood. This is like a river. And then I saw the others. They were hanging suspended from the ceiling, from the walls, from everywhere, amidst the purple vine tentacles. They breathed in and out, still being kept alive, but just barely. Dozens of them were strung up and down the length of the cave, their chests rising and falling with weak breaths, but none of them opening their eyes or speaking. It was like they were sleeping. After a few long moments of searching, I found him, Greg, the hiker from the trail who was looking for his brother. He was hanging upside down from the wall just beside me, his eyes closed. Parts of him were missing, a piece of his cheek, part of his hand, but the wounds were slowly healing. The creature, whatever it was, kept its victims alive down there, I realized. It was ingesting them slowly, perhaps even using pieces of its other victims as nutrients to feed the ones who were dying of starvation, like an otherworldly pyramid scheme built of blood and human remains. Shaking that mental image away, I grabbed Greg's shoulder, hoping to wake him up quietly. His eyes shot open a second after I touched him, revealing only the whites, and he began to screech. And I don't mean screeching like he was screaming out of fear of pain or anything like that. This was an inhuman alarm cry which signified to me immediately that there was no shred of humanity left in him. He was now a part of the hive mind of the creature and its tentacle army. As his head turned on a swivel, I saw smaller tentacles were wrapped around him, going into his brain and into his neck, invading his ears and eyes, and drilled into his spinal column. I screamed involuntarily, seeing these details, and heard the creature in the tunnel as it recognized my presence. It wasn't fast, whatever it was, but it was huge. The cave shook around me, dust and pebbles falling from the stone ceiling above as I backed away from the hiker. Beneath my feet, the vines were suddenly moving quickly, sliding around so that I couldn't find my balance. As soon as my shoes found purchase on the stone floor beneath me, I began to run. The tunnel was alive all around me now, the whipping vines twisting and bending toward me, reaching out like greedy hands trying to grab me as I raced past. Looking over my shoulder, I saw the amorphous creature's central girth was finding its way through the cave and was moving my way a lot faster than I would have thought possible. But then again, I wouldn't have thought any of this was possible before living it. The light of the entryway was just up ahead, and I could smell the fresh air and could see the sun. Then my feet suddenly slipped as if someone had pulled a rug out from under me, and I went crashing to the ground face first. My jaw closed hard and bit the end of my tongue, causing it to bleed. The taste of copper filling my mouth a second later. I tried to get to my feet. The mental image of those poor, trapped people could be seen clearly in my mind's eye. In retrospect, I think the creature, whatever it was, needed us to be unsuspecting. If we were aware of what it was doing, its hypnosis wouldn't work. Maybe it was a chemical it released which caused people to want to explore the cave, a pheromone like insects use to communicate. But it didn't work as well if you knew about it, and if you understood its purpose. It released some more of that pheromone or whatever chemical it was using to lure people in, and I actually felt my legs grow a bit heavier, my eyelids too. It was like I had suddenly just worked 3 night shifts, and really needed to sleep. But then the wave of hypnosis passed and I felt the rumbling of the ground beneath me, and that broke me from the trance again, causing me to scramble to my feet from the cave floor and run. As I neared the cave entrance and sprinted toward it, leaving my backpack far behind in an effort to lighten the load, I saw the rocks were actually closing in, tightening the gap. The entryway was shrinking somehow. It was the vines, I realized. They were what was camouflaging the entrance, their color changing to match the pale gray stone. I picked up my pace, the twisting forms beneath me making it even more difficult. I didn't dare risk a glance over my shoulder, feeling the rumbling of the floor and knowing that the bulk of the creature was just behind me, closing in. With the gap of the exit narrowing even further, shrinking to the size of a dartboard, I dove headfirst into it, imagining my face slamming into a sheer rock wall as it suddenly turned to stone right in front of me, sealing me in this dark labyrinth of suffering forever with the rest of these tortured souls. My eyes were squinted tightly shut as I felt the vines pulling and tearing at me as I went through the gap. For an instant, they squeezed in around my midsection, threatening to stop me like Winnie the Pooh after an unfortunate attempt at pilfering honey. When I popped out of the hole and it sealed up behind me in an instant, I heard a loud crash as the creature flew headlong into its own obstruction. The trap it had created for me to keep me there had hindered its escape, preventing it from chasing after me. I could hear it thrashing and clawing at the vines, desperate for more flesh to sustain itself. Whatever it was growing too large even for its own control. Left alone to feed in the heart of the mountain, it would eventually destroy itself. It would consume its own flesh to sate its monstrous hunger, like a snake eating its own tail. I had a very strong suspicion that it was true. With that very specific idea in mind, I wandered back to my car. It was easier now without the backpack and all the gear, but the walk back to the cave would be harder. There would be lots to carry next time. After a trip to the hardware store, I went back out to the trail. It was nighttime now and the place was abandoned. I borrowed one of the Ranger ATVs and took my supplies out to the spot where the cave had been. After bringing a few buckets of water from the lake, I began my work. Since I had marked the cave, it was easy to find it again, and to begin laying down the fast-drying cement. As park rangers, our job is usually to stop people from vandalizing mountains in this way, but I got the feeling Mother Nature would forgive me. It was my job to protect this place and the people who visited, and nothing could protect people from this thing. It was best to seal it away forever and let it slowly consume itself. Without a fresh supply of hikers, it would eventually run out of calories. It would eventually expire. It was only a matter of time. The vine tentacles squirmed beneath the layer of cement, groggily reaching out for me, trying to pull me in. I grabbed the trowel and slopped on another thick coating and watched as it rapidly began to dry, and the tentacles began to smooth out and settle down again, falling back asleep. That inhuman shriek could be heard from inside again, much louder this time, as if all of the hikers who the creature had abducted had all woken up at the same instant, and for just a second, realized their predicament. "Sorry, Greg," I muttered to myself, alone in the dark forest. "I told you not to go in there." For a little backstory, I travel frequently. I live a one-suitcase lifestyle, traveling with the wind for the most part. As I go, I pick up odd jobs and such to make money to get by. As a teenager, I was inspired by Chris McCandless, and I have tried to make my life like his, except keeping in touch with friends and family along the way. I've seen many beautiful parks and such, and I really can't complain about my life. Things were normal until I met Rick, that is. He's a park ranger, a park I won't mention for my safety and your own. And our connection was instant. He was knowledgeable about the park, witty and quite drop-dead gorgeous if I'm being honest. We hit it off right away, and within the day of meeting we were going out for dinner. We talked for hours, and the next day we met up for a hike. I'm usually weary of strangers, but he was a ranger, so I trusted him. He showed me some beautiful valleys in the park and told some incredible stories about the wildlife along the way. Then he asked me to come back to his cabin. As a woman, this was a red flag. As nice as he was and as connected as I felt we were, it's still a little unnerving to think about going to a practically stranger's cabin, alone, when no one knows where you are. But I pushed my fear down and agreed to join him for dinner at his place after his shift. I met him at the ranger station, and we drove in his pickup to his cabin. It was set back in the woods, about 5 minutes outside of park property. On the way, he gave me a rundown of the house's history. Passed down for generations, it had been standing in the same place for over 200 years. His parents had used it as a summer house while he was growing up, but had gifted it to him when they decided to move to the West Coast. He had lived here for 5 years, and that's why he got a job as a park ranger. When we pulled down the long drive, you could tell the place had history. Calling this place a cabin feels like an understatement. This cabin was massive. A mansion would be a better word for it. It was grand and beautiful. It did resemble a cabin, just at a larger scale. The yard was huge, with the house set in the middle of the property. The edge of the woods surrounding the property gave me the creeps, if I'm being honest. It was almost dusk, and the woods weren't inviting. They looked scary, like they would twist and change when you turn your back. Rick turned to me once we had stepped into the entryway of his house. "What do you think?" He smiled. "It's beautiful," I said, staring at the tall ceilings and the giant staircase to my right. "I love it." He grabbed my hand and led me to the kitchen. The house really was beautiful inside. The only part I didn't like was the paintings on the wall. They followed you with their eyes, and it sent a chill down my spine. Rick must have noticed me eyeing the paintings because he then said, "That's everyone who's ever lived in this house. It's a tradition to have them painted and hung on the wall. I adore them, but they creep me out a little." He chuckled and then pointed at one of the frames. "There's me at the ripe old age of 16. His smile in the photo was the same as it was the day I met him. Big and inviting. Maybe it was the imperfect teeth or the way his dimples shined from his cheeks, but he looked so happy. The painting was gorgeously done. You could tell whoever painted it took lots of effort with the details. He looks like he hasn't aged a day, minus the deeper bags under his eyes and the 5 o'clock shadow that he had now. Maybe it's because I know him. But even to this day, his painting is the only one that doesn't give me the creeps. After a few minutes of introducing me to his family and the paintings, we continued into the kitchen. It was just as put together as the rest of the house, but you could tell the utensils and such had been around for a while. The KitchenAid mixer looked like it was from the 60s, if not older. If anything, the age of everything just gave it more charm. The fridge was also from the 60s, and it was quite cute. Everything in the kitchen was nice, and the lack of paintings and their suspecting gaze helped me to calm down. To skip a little bit of the lengthy, unnecessary details, I moved in with him about a week later. Very soon, I know, but I felt like I'd known him forever, and the park that he worked at was beautiful and massive. So much to see. I felt like I needed to stick around. Rick helped me to get a job at a watchtower in the park, and I was making good money too. About 6 months later, I found out I was pregnant. 3 months along. I wasn't really ready for a kid, but I was excited. Rick was stoked also, more than me, honestly. He's been a great dad. But he was nervous. After a lot of discussion, I agreed that I would take a leave from work to stay home until after the baby was born, just in case an actual emergency were to happen while I was on duty. I had been off for about 2 weeks now, and it was easy going. I took care of the yard work at our house and ventured into the surrounding woods, although not very far. Something still seemed off about them. I found ways to keep myself entertained, and it's not so bad. And Rick felt better knowing that the baby and I were safe on the property. That was until the 3rd week of being off work. It was bright and early on a Tuesday morning, although the forecast was calling for rain this afternoon. I figured I'd go out and weed the garden I had started, and then maybe do some light cleaning inside. I spent most of the morning weeding, and around noon I went inside to get something to drink. I was sitting at the counter drinking some water when I heard it. A faint yell. It caught my attention, but after not hearing anything else, I let it go, shuffling through the stack of mail I had brought in earlier. There was a letter from my sister, and I was about to grab a letter opener when I heard it again. A yell, louder this time, coming from outside, and another one. This time I could make out the words. "My baby. Oh no, my baby! Please help me." Even though I hadn't been pregnant for more than 4 months, my maternal instinct kicked in. A fellow mother was having trouble with her baby, and I needed to help. I pushed down the logical questions that I should have had, like, why was this lady on our property set deep into the woods? Or what could possibly be wrong with her baby that she hadn't taken it to the hospital and gotten help? I did make one choice before I went outside, that to this day I'm still grateful for. I grabbed my phone and car keys before going outside. Maybe it was the thought of needing to take this lady to the hospital, or the deep-down instinct of needing to flee in the face of danger, but nonetheless they were safely tucked in my pocket. When I stepped out onto the front porch, I saw her. Walking from the tree line, actually scratch that, limping, in a way that was so grotesque it made my stomach flip. Something was wrong with this woman, and it was quite obvious. She continued howling, "My baby," as she limped her way closer to the house. The way she moved is something I will never forget. It was scary and gross. Her arms were wrapped by her chest, cradling a bundle of what I could only assume to be her baby. When she stepped forward, she drug her leg behind her. With every step, her body swayed down and then back up again, almost as if her legs were 2 different lengths. She moved slowly and kept her head down. Since she was still pretty far off, I couldn't really see her face, but I could see that her hair was tangled and falling down over her face, and that her head hung far to one side. Her clothes looked old, almost like she had just stepped out of the early 1900s. She looked gross and injured, to say the least. Realizing that I was just standing there when someone clearly in distress was right in front of me, I walked briskly down the stairs. Ma'am, what's wrong? Can I help you? Where's your baby? When she heard my voice, she looked up. The sight of her made me gag. She was terrifying. Her face was covered in dirt and scratches. Her neck was badly bruised, and her eyes, something I'll never get out of my head. They were just like the paintings in the hall, burning a hole right in you and never looking away. She looked at me, and then it was like she changed. She went from the prey to the predator. The bundle in her arms hit the ground in an instant, with no regard for what I'd assumed to be the baby. She took off, running, if that's what you could call it, never taking her eyes off of me. She came charging right towards me, hobbling at high speeds, making this disgusting gurgling sound. "You have my baby," she screamed at me, still charging at me from the edge of the tree line. I was so caught off guard that I just stood there. Then all at once it hit me that I needed to get the fuck out of there ASAP. I dove my hand into my pocket and grabbed my keys. Taking off towards my car, it was like the woman creature picked up speed. She was about the same distance from me that I was from my car. I ran faster than I ever had. Glad that I left my car unlocked, I ripped the door open, dove into the driver's seat and slammed the door, smashing down repeatedly on the lock button. I shut the door just in time. The woman reached my car and began banging on my window. My eyes never left hers as my hand slid the key into the ignition and turned. The car roared to life. I threw it into drive and slammed on the gas, tearing up the gravel as I sped down the driveway. Every time I shut my eyes, I could see the woman's eyes. They were bright yellow. Such an unnatural color for eyes. Her facial features were gaunt and she seemed lifeless. Once I reached the end of my driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. She stood about halfway down the drive with her head hung at that unnatural angle. I couldn't really make out her face, but I could feel her eyes staring right at me. I punched on the gas and took off, going to the only place I could think of, the park. Once I reached the ranger station, I parked my car and sprinted into the building. When I got inside, one of the rangers named Stacy was sitting at a desk. "Jesus, Nettie, you look like you've seen a ghost." She jumped up from her chair and walked over to me, pulling me into a hug. "What's wrong, sweetie?" "There was a woman at my house. She tried to attack me, I think. I don't know, I got in my car before she could get to me." I sighed, pulling away from the hug. I just now realized I was crying. "I'm calling Rick back from patrol. You need to sit down." Stacy pulled me over to a chair and she walked over to the phone. After talking briefly to Rick on the phone, she came back and sat down across from me. "Start from the beginning, what happened?" I told the story in full, starting from when I went inside to get a glass of water. I felt crazy retelling it just sounded ridiculous, but there was no denying it had happened. "Is that how your window got cracked?" Stacy gestured out the window. My car window was indeed cracked, pretty much shattered. I have no idea how I didn't notice it earlier. Must have been because of the adrenaline or something. I know I sound crazy, but I swear I'm not making any of this up. She looked into my eyes and I could see the sympathy. "Listen, girlfriend, I totally believe you. I work at a national park and I've seen some shit that I couldn't logically explain. I know one thing for sure. You're not going back to that house tonight, definitely not alone." We waited for Rick to get to the station. Stacy told me about a date she had been on recently. The date story was boring, but I'll be forever grateful that she told it to me, because it gave me a few moments of distraction from the sheer terror I was feeling. I had made up my mind right then and there that I wouldn't be going back to that house, not while that woman-like thing was still on the prowl, especially not if she wanted my baby. The baby that was 4 months old, nowhere near ready to be born and never ready to be snatched by some foul creature from the 1900s. It seemed like an eternity, but Rick finally showed up. He burst through the door and pulled me up into a hug. "What the fuck happened?" He pulled back and looked into my eyes. I'm sure he could see the terror. I had been calm while Stacy was telling me her story, but after finally seeing Rick, the anxiety and fear was back. I told the story again from beginning to end, while Rick paced back and forth across the station. When I finished the story, Rick simply said, "Come with me." I stood up and walked after him out the door. I glanced back at Stacy and she gave me a look of sympathy, but she nodded for me to follow. Rick got into his truck and I got in the passenger seat. He sighed loudly. "We have to go back to the house." "I'm sorry, but what the fuck do you mean we have to go back to that house?" "I'm not going back there. You can't make me. Did you hear a fucking word I said? I'm not— Stop." Rick turned to look at me. I'm not going to lie, I was fuming. I was not going back to that fucking house, not after what I had seen. Not after what had happened. Not today, and honestly, not ever. We have to go back. I know you don't want to, and I know I sound crazy, but we have to. I'm sorry. I was really hoping this wouldn't happen while you were here. But since it did, we have to do something about it. He put his hand on mine for a moment, and then pulled away, turning the key in the ignition. Are you going to at least tell me what happened? Who that lady was? And why this happened in the first place? Yes, but you need to listen, and you've got to believe me. It sounds crazy, but after what you've seen, I'm sure believing me won't be a problem. I nodded, not sure what to say. Today you met Laura. She lived in the house from 1892 to 1917. She was an aunt of mine. Obviously one that goes back a ways. I don't remember how many greats she was. Anyway, in 1917 she got pregnant with her first child. She was an old mother for her time, even though 25 is nothing nowadays. When she finally gave birth, the baby was stillborn. Since there wasn't much for medical things back then, they didn't know that the baby was dead until the day it was born. Laura was overcome with grief from the death of her baby. She carried around its poor corpse for days until it began to stink, and her brother, my something great-grandfather, had to take it from her and bury it in the family cemetery. After taking her baby away, Laura completely lost it. One of her sister-in-laws was pregnant at the time, and Laura went after her. She tried to claw the baby right out of her, the whole time screaming about her baby. My grandpa and uncle were able to break them up. But something had to be done about Laura. They planned on taking her to a hospital for the insane, but they locked her in her bedroom that night, not knowing it was the last time they'd see her alive. She hung herself from the rafters that night, breaking her neck. She's haunted the place ever since. I've only seen her once, shortly after my brother was born, and I never wanted to see her again. But I've heard her story many times. He looked over at me. I was in shock. I believed him. I'd seen this lady and her neck was definitely broken, but still. The story did sound pretty crazy. And this was a lot to take in. I'd seen weird shit working in the watchtower and throughout my travels, but nothing quite that far out in left field. I just nodded in response to Rick's words, and that seemed to be enough for him. He put the truck in drive and began the trip to our house. After a few minutes, I spoke. Ricky, what are we going to do when we get there? Is Laura gone? Listen carefully. We can get rid of her for now, but we have to do this right the first time. He looked at me. Do you understand? Yes. Good. All right. When we get to the house, she'll be sitting on the porch on the rocking chair to the far left. She'll have her little bundle in her arms again, and she'll be calm. She'll be fine until she notices you're there. Then she'll get up and begin to approach you again. I know it's scary, but I'll be right with you the whole time, I promise. When she notices you, you need to speak these words. Say them loud and clear so she hears you. Laura, your baby lies not with me, but in the clearing over the hill, in a little basket under the ground, waiting for you. Do you hear his cries? He needs you. It'll be obvious if she's heard you, and then she'll retreat into the woods to the cemetery where her baby is. Rick looked back at me. Got all that? Yeah, I think so. Laura, your baby lies not with me, but in the clearing over the hill, in a little basket under the ground, waiting for you. Do you hear his cries? He needs you. I recited word for word, ready to do whatever it takes to get that ghost away from our house. Sounds good. You're as ready as you'll ever be, as I guess. He kept his eyes on the road. We were almost to the turn for our driveway. How do you know this will work? What do we do if it doesn't? I didn't mean to come across as panicky, but can you blame me? I've never dealt with ghosts before, especially not ones trying to steal my unborn child. It's gonna work. But if it doesn't, just get back in the truck and we'll leave. But it's gonna work, I promise you that, darling. He grabbed my hand. Everything's gonna be just fine. But how do you know? I wanted to believe him, I really did, but it all just sounded so silly. Because my mom did it when I was younger. I've heard plenty of stories. My family has been doing this since Laura passed. There's no way to get rid of her, just ways to keep her at bay. He squeezed my hand. Just like that, we were pulling down the long gravel driveway. I could see Laura, rocking back and forth on our porch, staring down over that little bundle of blankets. We parked a few yards away from the porch, and we both stepped out of the truck, leaving the doors open. Rick whispered to me, I'll get her attention, but the second she looks at you, you need to start talking immediately. I nodded in response. The phrase was on repeat in my head. I was so afraid I'd forget something and mess everything up. I couldn't risk that. Rick whistled. Just a small little tune. One that I'd heard him whistle many times before as he walked around the house. Laura looked up from the bundle and Rick nodded. I felt her eyes hit me and I began. Laura, your baby lies not with me, but in the clearing over the hill. At this point, she was at the bottom of the stairs. Her head hung to the side, and her nasty yellow eyes burning holes in me. In a little basket under the ground, waiting for you. She was maybe 15 feet away, her pace getting faster and faster, coming right towards me. Do you hear his cries? 10 feet. He needs you. The second the "you" left my mouth, she stopped dead in her tracks. Thank God for that, because at that point she was a mere 3 feet away, and that was way too close for comfort. Suddenly her head whipped to the other side and she seemed to morph right in front of my eyes. Her legs seemed to even out. Her clothes went from looking tattered and old to brand new, and her eyes turned into a stunning blue, seemingly identical to Rick's eyes. Then her neck snapped straight like a normal person's neck would be. The worst part by far was when she opened her mouth and spoke. Her voice was hoarse at first, but then after a few words it sounded normal and quite pretty. She had a sing-song tone to the way she spoke. I hear him. I do. Pardon me, but I must tend to my babe. Thank you. And with that she turned around and walked back towards the tree line. Her stride was normal now, no longer limpy and painful. We stood hand in hand until she disappeared into the trees. I was a lot more at peace than I thought I would be, if I'm being honest. Maybe it was because Laura was just grieving and not actually evil, or maybe it's just because the whole experience seemed surreal. Either way, I was calm. We shut the truck doors and headed into the house. When we got inside, the first thing my eyes did was drift to the hallway with the paintings. I found Laura fairly quickly. She was beautiful, not nearly as frightening as she had been that afternoon. In fact, she mostly resembled the lady who had just returned to the woods a mere 5 minutes ago. The rest of the paintings still felt like they looked directly at me, but her eyes seemed softened. They didn't feel like they burned into me anymore, thank goodness. I went to bed shortly after that, but there was one more thing Rick told me about Laura that I feel like I should mention. Apparently Laura only appears once per child, so I'll never see her again unless I have another baby. Luckily, she doesn't appear for children who don't live on the premises. That's good, because I wasn't looking forward to explaining to any future guest why there was a strange lady sprinting her way across the lawn. Well, that's all for this story. But trust me, I have many more, some about my time working at the Watchtower, some about touring through the park, and a good deal of them about other things that happen at the house. In the remote wilderness of upstate New York, deep within the Adirondack Mountains, there is a ranger outpost known only as Station 17. It doesn't appear on most tourist maps. To hikers, it's just a rest point. To rangers, it's the last line between civilization and the deep forest. And to me, it became the place where everything stopped making sense. My name is Jackson Turner, and I worked as a forest ranger for the New York State Park System. For years, my job was simple: assist hikers, monitor weather conditions, and respond to emergencies in the backcountry. Lonely work? Yes, but predictable. Until that winter. It started in early January. Snowfall had been light but constant, drifting through the trees like ash. Temperatures hovered just above freezing during the day and dropped sharply at night. The kind of weather that makes the forest feel alive in a way you can't quite explain, like it's listening. That afternoon, around 3:00 p.m., I was inside the ranger station repairing a faulty radio transmitter when I heard a knock at the door. Not urgent, not panicked, just impolite. Like whoever was outside didn't want to disturb the forest itself. I opened the door. 5 hikers stood there, 3 men and 2 women. They looked like they had stepped out of an outdoor magazine, clean, expensive gear from brands like North Face and Arc'teryx, boots that looked brand new despite the snowstorm building behind them. The leader spoke first. Hey, we're a little off track. Storm hit earlier than expected. His name, he said, was Martin Collins. He sounded American, maybe West Coast. Behind him stood Lucas Bennett, Diego Ramirez, Sophia Grant, and Tara Mitchell. All exhausted, all smiling with relief. I let them inside. That was the first mistake. Inside the station, they warmed themselves by the stove. I gave them coffee, blankets, and access to the emergency bunk area, They were grateful, too. Grateful, like they had been holding their breath for hours. But something felt off. Not obvious, not dramatic. Just subtle inconsistencies. None of them removed their gloves completely. None of them sat with their backs to the room. And every few seconds, one of them would glance toward the door, as if expecting someone else to walk in. About an hour later, there was another knock. Different this time. Slower. Heavier. Like wood being tested instead of requested. I opened the door again. A single man stood outside. Tall, over 6 feet, covered in snow that didn't seem to melt against his clothing. He wore mismatched winter gear, an old wool coat, synthetic hiking pants, and boots that didn't match the season or the terrain. No backpack, no supplies, no expression. He simply stepped inside and sat in the far corner of the room, without speaking. Without acknowledging anyone, the group tried to talk to him. "Hey man, you okay?" No answer. "Do you need help?" Silence. But he was listening, watching, studying them one by one, slowly, like he was memorizing something important. Martin eventually leaned toward me and whispered. We passed another campsite about half a mile north. There were 3 hikers there. Looked experienced. But something was wrong. "What do you mean wrong?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "They were wearing gear exactly like his." He nodded toward the silent man in the corner. I turned. The man was still sitting, still watching. But now I noticed something new. His gaze wasn't random. It was structured. He was counting them, quietly, systematically, as if confirming inventory. That's when I decided to check the campsite myself. I armed up, told Lucas to stay behind, and headed into the snow. The storm was getting worse. Wind cutting through the trees like distant screams. The forest felt aware. Like it knew I was walking into something I shouldn't see. After 30 minutes, I reached the campsite, or what was left of it. 3 high-end tents shredded apart like paper. Gear scattered everywhere. No bodies at first. No blood. Just silence. Too much silence. Then I found the first sign. A jacket sleeve buried under snow. Then a boot. Then something worse. A human arm. Detached cleanly. No bite marks. No animal tracks. No struggle pattern I recognized. Just absence. As if something had removed people without respecting the rules of violence. I backed away immediately and ran. Back toward Station 17. The wind behind me sounded wrong now. Not just wind. Something layered underneath it, like faint voices trying to form words. When I returned, the front door was slightly open. Just a few inches. Not enough for wind, too much for coincidence. My instinct screamed before my mind caught up. I drew my weapon and entered. The smell hit first. Metallic. Warm. Fresh. Inside, one of the hikers lay near the entrance. Dead. Not just dead. Destroyed in a way that didn't resemble animal predation. The second mistake had already unfolded. The main room was worse. Blood across the floor. Furniture overturned. The remaining hikers, scattered like something, had moved through them quickly, efficiently, without hesitation. And in the center of it all, the silent man. Except he was no longer silent. He was feeding. Not like an animal. Not like a human. Something in between imitation and misunderstanding. I raised my weapon and fired. Once, twice, 3 times. He reacted instantly. Too fast. He moved upward onto the wall, defying gravity as if it was optional. Then he turned his head. All the way. 10 degrees. His face changed, his jaw extended slightly. His eyes darkened into something deep and reflective, like empty glass. And then he smiled. I kept firing. He launched toward me. I barely had time to move before he broke through the window behind me and disappeared into the storm outside. Silence returned. But it wasn't peace. It was absence. The official report called it a wild predator incident. Bear attack. Case closed. Station 17 was relocated closer to the highway. My field duty ended soon after. I was reassigned to administrative work in Albany. They said I needed rest. They said I was overstressed. They didn't believe me. But I started noticing something after that. People, patterns, behavior. Sometimes in public places I would see someone sitting alone and notice others subtly avoiding them, not openly, not consciously, just instinctively, like something in their presence triggered discomfort they couldn't explain. At first I dismissed it. Then it started happening more often. Months later I found something in archived ranger incident reports. Different states, different years, same pattern. Silent strangers appearing before disappearances. Entire hiking groups vanishing without trace. Survivors describing someone who looked almost right but not quite human. Every case ended the same way. Natural causes. No further action required. That's when I realized something terrifying. It wasn't one creature. It wasn't even a creature in the normal sense. It was something that learned behavior. Something that studied humans, copied them, wore them, but never understood them. Last week I returned to Adirondack Park. I don't know why. Maybe to prove it was over. Maybe to prove it never existed. The new Station 17 was modern now. Brighter, safer, closer to civilization. Everything looked normal. Too normal. A group of hikers arrived just before dusk. 5 of them. 3 men, 2 women. Matching expensive gear. Laughing. Taking photos. Preparing for their trip like nothing in the world could go wrong. I watched them from the station window. Then I saw him. A 6th person stood slightly behind them. Not part of the group. Not speaking. Not interacting. Just watching them. Counting them. Slowly. Patiently. And when I focused on his face, my stomach dropped. Because I recognized him. Not someone like him. Not a similar posture. Not a resemblance. Him. Exactly as before. The same silent expression, the same empty attention, the same patient stillness. He looked up, directly at me, and smiled. But this time, I wasn't inside the station anymore. I was outside, and I don't remember leaving.